Emily ran barefoot across the gravel, her lungs burning with each ragged breath, the night air sharp against her skin. Shadows stretched long behind her, cruel reminders of what chased her. David's voice echoed, deep and commanding, "You cannot run from salvation." Her heart pounded louder than his words, each beat screaming rebellion against chains she could not yet name. The locked gates clanged shut ahead, trapping her in a prison of faith disguised as love. Grace whispered through the dark, "Turn back before it's too late." But Emily pushed forward, her body trembling with terror. She stumbled, palms scraping raw against stone, yet she rose again, desperate for air and freedom. Every sound behind her grew heavier, closer. The gravel cut into her feet, but the pain was nothing compared to the suffocating weight of lies pressing on her chest. She could not stop. She would not stop. Emily pressed her back against the cold iron gate, chest heaving. Grace's voice wavered. "Obedience is safety." Emily shook her head, her voice cracking. "Safety is a lie." The compound smelled of smoke and damp wood, every corner whispering confinement. David's chants in the distance rose like thunder, each word pressing down like a chain. Emily closed her eyes, remembering when his voice had sounded like comfort, like home. Now it carried poison, promises that smothered instead of saved. She wanted to scream, but fear sealed her throat. The shadows pressed closer. Every heartbeat warned her she was one step away from being dragged back into the prison she had been raised to love. She whispered to herself, "Don't believe them, not anymore." Emily crouched low, pressing her hands against the damp earth, listening to the approaching footsteps. Samuel, the enforcer, called out, "Return now, and be forgiven." His voice cut like steel, offering no mercy. Her body shook, not from cold but from dread of his hands closing around her arms again. She remembered his punishments, precise and merciless, always claiming love as he delivered pain. "Forgiven," she whispered bitterly, pressing her forehead to her knees. They never forgave, they only broke. The sound of gravel crunching grew sharper, closer. She clenched her fists, nails biting her palms. A choice loomed heavy: surrender to Samuel or keep running into the night that might swallow her whole. Emily darted into a narrow passage between wooden sheds, heart hammering like a trapped bird. She pressed against rough planks, splinters biting into her back. A child's faint cry drifted from inside one shed, innocent and haunting. "Lily," Emily whispered, remembering the little girl's trusting eyes. She wanted to run back, to pull her out, but fear gripped her tighter. David's sermons filled her memory, his promise that children were pure vessels for faith, yet Lily's tears told another truth. "I will come back," Emily breathed, though her voice shook with doubt. The footsteps grew louder, echoing against the wooden walls. She closed her eyes, holding the memory of Lily's smile, as both a wound and a reason to keep moving. Emily staggered into the open courtyard, chest heaving, her body trembling from exhaustion. The night air tasted of smoke and fear. David stood at the far end, his arms raised high, voice booming like a storm. "You cannot escape truth," he declared, his words twisting through the darkness. Behind him, Samuel stood ready, a shadow waiting to strike. Grace lingered at the edge, eyes full of conflict, torn between duty and compassion. Emily's voice broke as she shouted, "Your truth is a lie!" The air vibrated with silence after her words, every follower watching unseen from the shadows. For the first time, Emily's defiance echoed louder than David's control. But terror followed triumph, because she knew what came next. Emily sat on the cold floor of the dormitory, her arms wrapped around her knees, as distant chants seeped through wooden walls. She remembered nights when she was a child, thinking those voices meant love. David's sermons had been her lullabies, his words dripping with promises of family and salvation. Grace once whispered to her, "We are chosen, Emily, special among the lost." The words felt like sunlight, then wrapping her in warmth she desperately wanted. She had clung to them, needing to believe she belonged somewhere. Now, every echo of the chants pressed on her chest like a weight, and she realized it was never love. It was possession. Tears burned her eyes as she whispered, "I only ever wanted to be loved." In the dining hall, rows of wooden tables stretched beneath flickering lanterns. Emily sat among other followers, staring at the bowl of thin soup before her. Children laughed softly, believing this place was home. She envied their innocence, their ability to still smile. Grace leaned close, murmuring, "This family saves us." Emily forced a smile, but her voice trembled. "It feels more like a cage." Grace's eyes narrowed, torn between affection and doctrine. David's words echoed from the far end, his voice honeyed with authority. "Together we are strong. Alone, you are nothing." Emily swallowed the bitterness in her throat. The truth was clear. Her longing for family had been used to bind her tighter to chains she couldn't yet break. Emily walked through the courtyard, where followers knelt in prayer beneath a pale morning sky. She remembered when kneeling beside her mother felt like love, not obligation. Samuel passed by, his gaze stern, reminding her of punishment for disobedience. Emily's chest tightened with guilt and yearning. She had once believed that God himself looked down on her in those moments, smiling at her devotion. But now, she saw only a leader demanding control. "I wanted to be whole," she whispered to herself, trembling. The truth clawed at her. Her innocence had been carved into obedience. Every prayer she once offered was now a chain. Every whisper of faith had been stolen and twisted into control. Inside the chapel, David's voice rose above the silence, echoing against wooden beams. His eyes scanned the crowd, landing briefly on Emily. He smiled warmly, but it chilled her bones. "This love is eternal," he said, his arms raised. The room hummed with murmured prayers, voices like chains binding every soul. Emily's lips moved, repeating the words, but her heart ached with emptiness. Grace placed a hand on her shoulder, whispering, "This is all we need." Emily's chest constricted. She wanted to believe, but every word felt hollow. Her heart whispered a truth too dangerous to speak aloud. Love should not hurt, yet here it always did. That night, Emily lay awake on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. The chants had faded, leaving only the sound of her own breathing. She remembered her father's words from years ago, "This place will keep you safe." She wanted to believe him then, wanted to believe that safety and love lived in the same place. But the truth burned now. Her father's promise was just another lie told in the name of faith. Emily whispered into the silence, "I wanted a family, but they gave me chains." Her tears slid silently across the pillow. She had lost her childhood to lies, and now she wondered if she could ever reclaim her freedom. Morning light crept through the cracks in the wooden dormitory, but the warmth did nothing to ease Emily's chest. David's voice thundered from the courtyard, calling everyone to prayer. "Discipline brings purity," he declared, and followers bowed without hesitation. Emily moved slowly, her stomach tight with dread, watching children kneel without question. Samuel's sharp gaze swept the crowd, ensuring no one faltered. Emily's knees touched the cold ground, but her thoughts screamed against the command. She remembered the first time she had been forced to kneel for hours, her legs trembling while David's eyes praised her suffering. She whispered to herself, "Purity feels like pain." Yet she lowered her head, hiding the rebellion growing behind her eyes. The punishment hall smelled of ash and damp wood. Emily stood trembling as Samuel uncoiled a leather strap with calm precision. His voice cut sharp. "Disobedience is rebellion against God." Her heart hammered, her arms shaking as she tried to keep them steady. She remembered when the strap first touched her skin as a child, and Grace whispered, "This will save your soul." Emily had believed it, too young to see cruelty behind devotion. Now each strike was memory and scar, each lash a reminder of obedience built on fear. She clenched her teeth, refusing to cry, though pain seared across her. Faith shouldn't feel like fire, she thought. Yet Samuel's eyes showed no hesitation, only devotion to David's law. Emily watched her parents from across the dining hall, their faces hardened by years of doctrine. Her father's eyes were sharp, his hand gripping her younger brother's shoulder tightly. "Sit straight," he barked, voice filled with devotion instead of love. Her mother offered a faint smile, whispering prayers under her breath, eyes distant as though faith replaced her affection. Emily's chest ached, remembering how she once believed they were protecting her. But now she saw the truth. They were teaching obedience, not love. She wanted to cry out, "Why didn't you choose me instead of him?" Instead, she swallowed silence, watching as her brother bowed his head, believing their discipline meant care. The lie cut deeper than any strap. The courtyard was silent, as Emily slipped a piece of bread into Lily's hands, the little girl's eyes wide with hunger. "Eat quickly," Emily whispered, her hands trembling. Lily smiled faintly, clutching the bread like treasure. But footsteps approached and Emily's chest froze. Samuel's shadow fell across them, his voice sharp. "What are you hiding?" Emily shook her head, forcing her voice calm. Nothing, she only needed comfort. Samuel's eyes narrowed, but he walked on, leaving suspicion heavy in the air. Emily's breath shuddered out as Lily chewed quickly, her innocence lit by fragile hope. Emily thought, every act of kindness feels like rebellion. Fear laced her heartbeat, but for the first time she didn't regret the risk. That night, Emily lay awake, listening to whispers in the dormitory. The rebel, Daniel, leaned close, his voice low. "You know this is wrong." Emily's pulse quickened, her chest tightening with fear and hope. She had seen Daniel beaten for questioning David before, but his eyes burned with defiance even now. "If we don't stop them, they'll crush us all," he murmured. Emily's voice cracked. "And if they catch us?" Daniel smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both danger and promise. "Then at least we'll know we tried." Emily's heart raced with conflict, torn between fear of punishment and the desperate need for truth. She closed her eyes, whispering, "I'm not ready, but I can't stay silent forever." Emily sat in the prayer hall, her body rigid as David's sermon echoed through the wooden beams. His words flowed like honey, yet they dripped poison. "We are chosen," he said. "Our sacrifices make us holy." She looked around, faces bowed in blind devotion, their eyes shining with desperate belief. Her chest tightened as doubt gnawed at her. She noticed Grace's trembling hands folded tighter than prayer should require. Emily thought, even faith cannot hide fear. The chants grew louder, yet beneath the rhythm she heard a crack, voices uncertain, whispers struggling to remain hidden. For the first time she realized not everyone believed, and the perfect walls of obedience were beginning to fracture. Later that night, Emily followed hushed voices into a corridor behind the chapel. A door stood slightly ajar, lantern light spilling into the dark. She peered in and froze. David stood not as a prophet, but as a man counting money, stacks of bills spread across the table. His smile was not holy, but greedy, his hands trembling with excitement. "They give everything, and still it is never enough," he muttered to himself. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Every sermon, every sacrifice had been for this, not God, but gold. The image shattered the foundation of her childhood. Her voice cracked in a whisper. He was never divine. The truth was a knife that cut through years of lies. Emily slipped back into the dormitory, her chest heaving with the weight of truth. But before she could breathe, her brother Nathan appeared. His eyes glistened with tears as he whispered, "I heard you. You doubt him." Emily's body froze, fear spreading faster than breath. Nathan's voice cracked, "If I tell David, he will save you." Her heart shattered at his words. Love turned to betrayal. She grasped his hands desperately. "Please don't." But his gaze was already shifting, torn between sister and doctrine. His whisper trembled. "I love you, but I love him more." Emily's throat burned as silence swallowed her pleas. The knife of betrayal had not cut her flesh, but it carved deeper than any wound. The next day, Emily stood in the courtyard, her heart pounding as whispers spread among followers. Grace leaned close, voice trembling. "Do you see it? They are afraid too." Emily's eyes darted across the crowd. Eyes that once shone with blind faith now flickered with unease. Even Samuel's posture faltered for a moment, his hand trembling before stiffening again. David raised his arms, shouting promises of salvation, but his voice cracked under the strain. Emily realized the leader's mask was slipping, and fear rippled through the flock like fire. The certainty she once envied was unraveling. She whispered under her breath, "They're beginning to see." For the first time, her fear was matched by hope. That night, Emily sat alone, the silence heavy around her. She pressed her hands against her face, memories flashing like broken glass. Every lesson, every promise, every word of love from David crumbled into dust. Her childhood was built on lies, and now the truth bled through the cracks. She whispered to herself, "I gave everything to shadows." The weight of betrayal crushed her, yet beneath the pain a spark glowed. Lies had shaped her, but truth had freed her eyes. She lifted her head, eyes red but burning with defiance. "I will not kneel again," she said into the empty room. The vow tasted like iron, sharp and unbreakable. It was the moment innocence died, and rebellion was born. The punishment hall was silent, except for Emily's shallow breaths. David stood at the center, eyes blazing with fury, his voice a blade. "You will kneel, or you will be broken." Samuel held the leather strap, his hands steady, his face cold as stone. Emily's knees shook, but she remained upright, her body trembling with defiance. Grace stood in the corner, her lips pressed tight, torn between compassion and fear. The weight of every eye bore down on Emily, pressing her toward the ground. Her heart pounded, refusing to surrender. She whispered, "I will not kneel." The words cracked the silence like lightning. A storm had been unleashed, and Emily knew there would be no turning back. David's fury erupted, his voice echoing through the hall. "Rebellion is death," he thundered. Samuel advanced, strap raised, but Emily's body surged with desperation. She shouted, "Then let it be death." Her words burned in the air, silencing the whispers of followers who had gathered. For a heartbeat, even Samuel froze, his hand trembling. Grace gasped, her eyes widening with both terror and admiration. David's face twisted into rage, yet beneath it Emily saw fear, fear of losing control. The hall crackled with tension, the line between obedience and freedom drawn in fire. Emily's body shook, but her spirit had already crossed into defiance. This was the moment her chains shattered, even if her body would pay the price. Emily stumbled into the dormitory later, her body aching from blows but her spirit burning. Daniel leaned close, his voice fierce. "It's time. We can't wait anymore." His eyes glowed with reckless courage, a spark that ignited her fear into action. She whispered, "They will kill us." Daniel gripped her hand tightly, his voice firm. "Then let us die running, not kneeling." Emily felt the weight of his words, heavy and terrifying, yet liberating. Grace appeared at the doorway, her face pale, her whisper urgent, "Tonight before dawn." Emily's chest tightened as the plan took form, every heartbeat a drum of defiance. For the first time, escape was not a dream. It was a choice, and she was ready. The compound lay in shadow as Emily crept through the courtyard, her breath shallow, the cold night air stinging her lungs. Daniel moved beside her, steps silent, eyes scanning every corner. Grace lingered behind, keeping watch, her face pale with fear. Samuel's voice echoed faintly in the distance, calling guards to patrol. Emily's heart raced, each step a war between terror and hope. The gates loomed ahead, locked and cold, the final barrier. She whispered, "We're almost there." Daniel pressed a key into her palm, stolen with risk. The metal felt heavier than chains. Emily's hands shook as she slid it into the lock. The sound of turning metal was the loudest thunder she had ever heard. The gates groaned open, and Emily's breath caught in her throat. Behind them, footsteps thundered, voices shouting her name. David's roar split the night, "You cannot leave me." Samuel's figure surged from the shadows, fury etched into his face. Daniel pulled Emily forward, whispering, "Run!" The cold air hit her skin like freedom, her bare feet slamming against dirt. Grace hesitated, torn between chains and escape, before finally stepping through with trembling resolve. Emily's chest burned, every breath ragged, but her soul soared. The night became a storm of fear and fire. She whispered through her tears, "I am free." The chase had begun, but for the first time, the path was hers to claim. Emily stumbled into the forest beyond the compound, her chest burning as she gasped for air. The moonlight filtered through branches, silvering the leaves. Daniel pressed her forward, his hand tight around hers, whispering, "Keep moving." Grace followed a few paces behind, her breath uneven, her eyes darting back to the gates fading into the distance. For the first time, Emily felt the world open beyond walls that once held her captive. Yet the silence of the forest was heavy, every rustle a reminder that the cult's shadow still followed. She whispered to herself, "This is freedom, but it feels like fear." The night air was cold, sharp with uncertainty, but her steps carried her away from chains. At dawn, Emily collapsed near a stream, the sound of water rushing against rocks filling the silence. She dipped her hands into the icy current, splashing her face as tears mixed with river water. Daniel knelt beside her, his voice soft. "We made it out." Grace sat on a fallen log, her face pale, hands trembling as if invisible chains still bound her. Emily stared at her reflection in the water, dirt and blood streaking her face, eyes hollow, yet alive. "I don't feel free," she whispered. The scars inside her were deeper than the wounds on her body. The stream washed over her fingers, yet nothing could wash away the years stolen in the name of faith. As the day stretched on, Emily's thoughts drifted to her family, still trapped inside the compound. The memory of Nathan's tear-streaked face haunted her, his voice whispering, "I love him more." She pressed her hands against her chest, the ache unbearable. Grace noticed her silence, whispering gently, "You cannot save everyone." Emily turned toward her, anger and sorrow mixing in her eyes. "He is my brother," she said, voice breaking. Daniel's expression hardened, his tone sharp. "If you go back, you die." Emily stared at the horizon, torn between blood and survival. Her family had chosen chains, but she carried the wound of their absence like a brand on her soul. Night fell again, and Emily stared at the stars above, the sky vast and endless. For years she had been told, heaven was only for the faithful inside those walls. Now she saw it stretching freely above her, untamed and unreachable by David's hands. Grace lay nearby, murmuring prayers as if unable to let go of old chains. Daniel sat guard, eyes sharp, listening for danger. Emily whispered, "They can't take this from me." The stars flickered like embers, fragile but eternal. Her soul ached with scars, yet in the silence of the night, she felt the first fragile breath of peace. The shadow of the cult lingered, but so did the promise that she was no longer their prisoner. Days later, Emily walked along a dirt path leading toward a distant town. Her body was weary, her feet blistered, but each step carried the weight of survival. Daniel walked ahead, scouting, while Grace followed behind in silence. The air was thick with smoke from distant fires, and Emily wondered if the cult still searched for them. Thoughts lingered on those left behind, the ones who would never leave. She whispered to herself, "Freedom costs everything." The ache of loss pressed heavy, but her eyes lifted toward the horizon. For the first time she saw a world beyond chains, and though scarred she walked into it. Her story was not finished, but the walls no longer held her. Emily sat on a bench outside the small town's edge, the first place she had ever seen beyond the compound's walls. Her eyes traced the streets alive with ordinary people, laughter and freedom. Yet her heart thudded with unease, her body foreign in this new world. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, whispering, "This is real, Emily. This is life." She nodded, but tears filled her eyes, for the sound of chants still lingered in her mind. Grace sat nearby, her face pale, clutching her rosary as though refusing to let go of the old chains. Emily whispered, "I don't know how to live." The words cracked in her throat. Freedom felt heavy, like a burden she had never been taught to carry. That night, Emily lay in a small borrowed room above a shop. The bed was soft, yet she could not sleep. The silence pressed heavy until it broke with phantom voices chanting inside her head. She curled into herself, gripping the blanket tightly. Daniel stirred awake, murmuring, "You're safe." But Emily shook her head, whispering, "I still hear them." Her body trembled, eyes staring into the dark as if shadows still lingered on the walls. Grace prayed softly in the corner, her words a mixture of comfort and chains. Emily's tears slid silently, the cult's presence clawing even into freedom. She thought, "I escaped the gates, but they are still inside me." The truth was a wound that would never close. Emily walked through the town's marketplace the next day, surrounded by colors, voices, and freedom she had never known. Children laughed as they played, vendors shouted over fresh bread and fruit. But her steps faltered, her chest tightening as she watched a group gather around a preacher on a corner. His words rang out about salvation and obedience. Her blood ran cold, her breath catching. Every word echoed like David's voice, and her body froze. Daniel touched her arm gently, grounding her. "Not all voices control," he whispered. But Emily's eyes blurred with tears as she thought, "Every sermon is a chain." She turned away, shaken, realizing she may never hear faith without hearing prison. At dusk, Emily sat by the river, staring at the water rushing endlessly forward. Grace sat beside her, silent, her eyes reflecting fading sunlight. Daniel skipped a stone across the surface, his voice firm. "You are not who they said you are." Emily's chest tightened, her throat burning with unspoken truths. She whispered, "But I don't know who I am." The river roared, drowning her doubts with sound, yet her reflection in the water revealed a face she barely recognized, scarred, weary, but alive. She touched the surface, ripples breaking the image apart. For the first time she saw not a victim, but someone who had endured. The question of who she was remained, but survival had given her the right to ask. That night, Emily sat alone under the stars, the vast sky stretching endlessly above. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "I still hear them chanting in my dreams." The words cut the silence like a blade. She thought of Nathan, her brother still trapped inside, and her chest ached with guilt that freedom was not his too. Tears fell, but her eyes burned with defiance as she whispered again, "I will never kneel." The stars above glowed, faint, eternal witnesses to her vow. Freedom was not peace, but it was hers. The scars would never fade, the shadows would never leave, but the final blow had already been struck. Emily had survived, and survival itself was rebellion.